Summer 1943. The air around the Alpine camp smelled of soap and lilacs, though nothing in that place was truly clean. Each morning, the women lined up in the courtyard, their shadows stretching long and thin across gravel that still remembered snow. The scent was an illusion, perfume rations issued to make soldiers believe something pure still existed in their war. The men liked that illusion. The women had no choice but to breathe it in. Lisselmuller, once a nurse from Berlin, rubbed a faint blue bruise on her wrist as she polished the mirror hanging in the officers' quarters. Her reflection wavered in the rippled glass, a stranger's eyes staring back. Behind her, the radio hissed with Hitler's voice, distant, almost bored now. She imagined switching it off, but that would invite questions, and questions brought boots. So she hummed instead. A lullaby her mother once sang when the air raids began. The melody was quiet rebellion, a private defiance disguised as habit. Major Otto Reinhardt passed through the hall like a man convinced the world belonged to him. His uniform was immaculate, his conscience perhaps less so. Efficiency is discipline, he said to no one, his gaze sweeping the corridor. Even in morale, he was fond of repeating that line, as if cruelty could be made elegant by repetition. Outside, the guards joked, the sound of laughter twisted with the clink of rifles. Inside, Lissel dusted a porcelain vase painted with tiny blue forget-me-nots. It was chipped near the rim, like everything else here, pretending to be whole. Hannelore Weiss entered, dragging a mop like a reluctant dance partner. "They're bringing in photographers again," she whispered. "For propaganda. Smiles are mandatory." She rolled her eyes with a smirk so small it could get her shot. Hannelore, once a pianist from Dresden, had learned that irony could be armor. She survived by turning bitterness into rhythm. "Smile, Lissel. You look almost human when you do." Lissel forced a grin. "Almost." Through the thin window, a truck rattled in, red dust clinging to its wheels. Inside sat new arrivals, women pale as linen, their faces blank, like paper waiting for someone else's story. One of them, a small figure with dark hair and trembling hands, carried nothing but a folded paper fan. Her name, they later learned, was Fumiko Kato, a transfer from the East, from a war that was supposed to be far away. She spoke little German, less English. Still, she smiled shyly when Lissel offered her bread. That smile, fragile, foreign, felt like a crack in the gray monotony of the camp. The sun burned too brightly for comfort that afternoon. Reinhardt's men lounged by the barracks, their shirts open, their laughter thick with boredom. One soldier complained about the quality of the soap. "Too much lye," he said. "Smells like hospitals." Another replied, "Then maybe you'll clean our sins, eh?" They laughed harder than the joke deserved. Hannelore muttered, "If soap could do that, there'd be saints everywhere." That evening, the women were ordered to light the lamps early. For atmosphere, Reinhardt declared, "Our guests arrive soon." Guests, officers on leave, with medals and manners borrowed from ghosts. Lissel moved through the corridors, setting out bowls of water, candles, folded linens. Each motion felt rehearsed, detached, mechanical. But when she passed Fumiko's corner, she paused. The young woman was writing with a stub of pencil on a torn propaganda leaflet, shaping small characters that looked like delicate vines. "Poems?" Lissel asked softly. Fumiko nodded, then whispered one word, "Haiku." She gestured toward the candle flame and spoke again, hesitant but clear. "Light still burns." Lissel understood. Somehow she smiled. As night fell, the music began, an old gramophone scratching out a waltz warped by static. Hannelore mommed a curtsy, twirling her mop like a partner. "Dance of the Damned," she said under her breath. Lissel almost laughed, but the sound caught her throat. The officers entered in clusters, their boots heavy, their laughter heavier. Reinhardt stood at the center, eyes sharp as bayonets, surveying his creation. "Gentlemen," he said, "Germany takes care of her soldiers." The line hung in the air like smoke. Behind him, the women stood arranged like mannequins, painted with powder that smelled faintly of lilac. Time blurred. The music skipped. Somewhere outside, A generator coughed and fell silent. Lissel found herself staring at the window again, at the reflection of her own face framed by candlelight. For a moment, she imagined she was still a nurse, bandaging wounds, saving men instead of pretending to please them. But the mirror didn't lie. It showed the hollow in her cheeks, the dull in her eyes, the faint stain of rouge that couldn't hide exhaustion. She turned away before the memory broke her. Later, in the kitchen, she washed her hands until her skin turned raw. The water was cold, the soap cheap, but she scrubbed anyway, as if she could erase the day. Hannelore leaned against the doorway, cigarette trembling between her fingers. "You'll wash yourself invisible if you keep that up." Lissel smiled weakly. "That's the idea." Outside, thunder rolled across the mountains. Or maybe it was artillery. No one could tell anymore. The war had become a weather system. Distant, constant, impossible to predict. Major Reinhardt entered, his boots echoing. "Ladies," he said, "we maintain dignity here. Remember that." His tone was almost polite, which made it worse. After he left, Hannelore spat into the sink. "Dignity," she said. "That's one perfume they can't bottle." Lissel wanted to laugh, but instead felt tears prick her eyes. She reached for the towel, drying her hands with slow precision, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile peace of the moment. In the barracks that night, the women lay awake listening to the hum of the generator, the distant thud of artillery, and the whisper of wind through pine trees. Fumiko's soft voice broke the silence. She recited her haiku in broken German. "Snow will fall again, even on warm, cruel hands." The words hovered in the air, strange and pure. Lissel closed her eyes and imagined snow covering the camp, muffling every sound, hiding every sin. She could almost smell it, clean, cold, real. Not lilacs. Never lilacs again. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams of her mother's kitchen, of sunlight over Berlin streets before they turned to rubble. She dreamt of water running clear, of hands unafraid to touch. When she woke before dawn, the silence felt heavier than usual. The radio was off. No speeches, no orders, no music. Just the faint hiss of the wind outside. Lissel sat up, heart racing. Hannelore stirred beside her. "What is it?" she whispered. Lissel listened, her breath held tight. The sky was pale, the air electric with something unnamed. Then she realized the loudspeakers, the ones that barked orders every morning, were dead silent for the first time in months. Somewhere far beyond the mountains, thunder cracked again, closer this time, sharper, almost human. She stood, moving to the window. The horizon glowed, faintly orange. Smoke, perhaps, or dawn. Hannelore joined her, rubbing her eyes. "Maybe it's over," she said, half hoping, half afraid. Lissel didn't answer. She stared at the glow spreading across the valley, the lilac perfume still clinging faintly to her sleeve. It smelled sweeter now, almost innocent. She lifted her wrist to her nose and whispered, "Maybe it's just beginning." Spring 1945. It began with thunder. Or what they thought was thunder. The women froze mid-task, their hands dripping suds, their hearts already guessing the truth. The sound came from far beyond the mountains, a steady growl that shook the camp's fragile silence. For days, whispers had spread like smoke. The Allies were coming. But in places like this, hope was a dangerous language, spoken only when the guards were too drunk to listen. Lissel Muller stood by the cracked window, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sky was the color of bruised steel, trembling under invisible weight. She could feel it in her bones, in the way the ground seemed to breathe. "It's thunder," she murmured, as if saying it aloud would make it less real. Hannelore laughed under her breath, a thin, nervous sound. "Then why does thunder march in rhythm?" Outside, the guards barked orders, their voices jagged. Trucks roared to life. Someone dropped a crate. It shattered like gunfire. Major Reinhardt appeared on the steps, his uniform still pristine despite the chaos around him. "Evacuate the records," he shouted. "The women stay." He said it like an afterthought, like they were furniture too heavy to move. By dusk, the officers were gone. The gate locked from the outside. The radio, once full of endless speeches, hissed to static. For the first time in 2 years, the loudspeakers fell silent. The quiet was unbearable. The women sat in the mess hall under flickering lamps, waiting. Fumiko Kato traced shapes in the dust with a shaking finger. She wrote a single word, home, and then wiped it away before anyone could see. Night brought no sleep. Distant flashes lit the mountains, each one followed by a low, rolling echo. Lissel lay awake, counting the seconds between light and sound. She remembered Berlin in 43, the first raid she survived, the window glass raining down like sharp snow. She had been a nurse then, not this ghost in a borrowed uniform. The scent of lilacs still clung faintly to her sleeve, stubborn and absurd, like memory refusing to die. At dawn, a new sound joined the thunder, deep, metallic, alive. Tanks. The ground quivered beneath their weight. The women pressed to the windows, breath fogging the glass. "Are they ours?" someone whispered. Hannelore shook her head. "No flags. Maybe nobody's anymore." Then came the shout, foreign, strong, and unmistakably American. The first tank rolled through the gate like a god made of iron and dust. Its star emblem gleamed through the grime. Soldiers followed, shouting orders and laughter all at once. One of them, tall, dark-skinned, wearing a crooked grin, was the first to see them. "Jesus," he muttered. "They kept women here." His name was Corporal James Crow of the 761st Tank Battalion. To Lissel, he looked like an angel carved from soot and sunlight. The women didn't cheer. They didn't run forward. They stood frozen, too afraid to believe. Crow lifted his hand slowly. "It's all right," he said. "You're safe now." His accent bent the words into something warm. One by one, the women stepped out from the shadows. Lissel felt her knees shake as she moved closer, drawn by the impossible gentleness in his voice. Another soldier approached, Sergeant Daniel Alvarez, a medic. He knelt, pulling open a ration tin. "Eat," he said simply. Lissel stared at the contents. Meat, bread, something red like jam. She reached for it, but her hand trembled so hard she spilled half. Danny smiled faintly. "Take your time. It's not going anywhere." She didn't understand every word, but she understood kindness. It hit harder than hunger. Hannelore took a bite of something called spam and winced. "It tastes like peace," she said dryly. One of the soldiers laughed. "Then peace needs salt." For a moment, everyone laughed, thin, cracked laughter that felt almost holy. Someone passed around bottles of Coca-Cola, the glass cold against their skin. When Lissel took her first sip, the fizz burned her throat. She coughed, eyes watering, then laughed through the pain. "It bites," she said. Crow grinned. "Freedom does that, ma'am." Outside, the soldiers moved through the camp, unlocking doors, cutting wires, tossing helmets into the dirt like shedding an old skin. One discovered Reinhardt's office, its walls lined with charts and false reports. He read one aloud. "Morale excellent. Productivity stable." Then he tore it down and spat. "Stable my ass." The phrase made Hannelore laugh until she cried. Fumiko emerged from the shadows, clutching her paper fan. Crow noticed her hesitation and crouched. "You okay, miss?" She blinked at his strange kindness, not understanding the words, but feeling them anyway. She bowed deeply. He, unsure what to do, bowed back, awkward but sincere. The sight made Lissel's chest ache. For the first time, the camp didn't feel like a grave. It felt like a wound finally bleeding clean. Later, as dusk fell, Danny found Lissel standing by the gate. The metal still bore the Nazi eagle, its wings chipped, its face smeared with mud. She touched it once, then stepped aside as the soldiers draped an American flag over it. "Does this mean it's over?" she asked softly. Danny looked at her for a long moment before answering. "For the war, maybe. For the hurt, not yet." His voice was quiet, but it carried more truth than any broadcast she'd ever heard. They buried the bodies found behind the barracks, the nameless ones, the forgotten. Fumiko placed her haiku on one of the graves, the paper trembling in the wind. Light still burns, even when sky falls silent. Danny read it aloud, his accent turning it into something deeper, almost prayer-like. Lissel closed her eyes, letting the words sink into her bones. That night, they lit fires in the yard. The soldiers sang. The women listened. Someone handed Lissel a wool blanket that smelled of gasoline and soap. She wrapped it tight around her shoulders, warmth shocking her skin. Hannelore found an old accordion and played a broken melody, something that wasn't quite sad and not yet joyful. The sound wove through the night like a promise no one dared to say aloud. Lissel looked toward the mountains, where faint flashes still lit the distance. The war was ending elsewhere, but its echo still rolled across the valleys. She thought of Berlin, of her mother, of the nurse she once was. Danny sat nearby, cleaning his boots. "What'll you do now?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "Remember," she finally said, "that's all I can do." The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee, real coffee, and the chatter of soldiers packing up. Crow saluted her with a grin. "We're moving out, ma'am. There's a convoy coming to take you folks to Munich." She wanted to thank him, but the words caught somewhere between her chest and throat. Instead, she reached into her pocket and handed him a small lilac petal, pressed flat between pages of a notebook. He looked puzzled. She smiled. "So you remember what freedom smells like." As the tanks rumbled away, dust rose behind them, blurring the camp's broken walls. The women stood silent, watching the sky brighten. Somewhere beyond, church bells rang for the first time in years. Lissel turned to Hannelore. "Do you hear it?" Hannelore nodded, eyes wet. "Sounds like thunder," she said. Lissel smiled faintly. "No, this time it's the world waking up." But as the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke from the east, Lissel's stomach tightened. The front was still burning. The war wasn't finished. It had simply changed its shape. In the distance, another rumble rolled through the valley, closer, deeper, unmistakable. She looked back toward the gate, now standing wide open, and whispered the words she didn't dare believe. "Maybe freedom has its own kind of thunder." Spring sunlight filtered through the torn roof of the field hospital, thin as silk and smelling faintly of disinfectant and smoke. Freedom, it turned out, came with paperwork. The women sat at folding tables made of ammunition crates, each handed a form by a weary allied clerk who didn't quite know what box to tick for people like them. Lissel Muller stared at hers. Name, age, place of birth, easy enough. Then came occupation. The word felt like a bruise. Hannelore Weiss leaned over her shoulder and whispered, "Right musician. At least that one still sounds like life." Lissel almost smiled. She wrote nurse instead, her pen trembling. Sergeant Daniel Alvarez moved down the row, checking bandages and pulse rates. He was kind but brisk, a man who treated silence like a wound to be cleaned. "Eat something," he told Lissel, setting down a tin of corned beef. "You need strength to sign all that freedom." She gave him a look, not sure whether to laugh or cry. "Does freedom always taste like metal?" He grinned softly. "Sometimes it does at first." His accent wrapped around the words like warmth in cold air. Outside, the camp was no longer a prison, but not yet a home. The American tents rose where the barracks had fallen, white canvas glowing under an indecisive sky. Soldiers handed out blankets, soap, new dresses, things meant to erase what had been done. But memories stuck tighter than dirt. Fumiko Kato folded her new uniform carefully, smoothing it over her knees as if afraid to wrinkle something sacred. When Lissel passed her, she saw that Fumiko's hands still trembled. "Too quiet," Fumiko whispered in halting German. "Silence loud." Lissel nodded. She understood. At noon, the Red Cross truck arrived, painted bright white like a lie told with good intentions. The nurse inside smiled with mechanical pity. "You're safe now," she said, as if safety were something that could be issued with rations. The women lined up for photographs and medical checks, the flashbulbs popping like tiny explosions. One photo captured Lissel and Hannelore side by side, their faces washed in gray light. Later, Lissel would see that picture in a newspaper, captioned "Liberated German Civilians," and wonder who those women were, smiling as if they believed it. The hospital loudspeaker crackled to life. "Displaced persons are to report for transport registration." The words echoed through the tents, sterile and final. Hannelore muttered, from prisoners to paperwork, one step forward. She adjusted the bandage on her arm and winked. Maybe they'll put us on posters. Freedom, now with extra forms. Lissel laughed, a brittle sound that startled even her. For a heartbeat, it felt almost human again. That night, the sky over Bavaria was restless with stars. The soldiers held a small bonfire near the edge of camp, their laughter rising into the dark like sparks. Lissel sat a few yards away, watching the flames reflected in her metal tray. In the reflection, she saw her own face, hollow-eyed but alive, framed by a flicker that could almost be mistaken for hope. Danny Alvarez joined her, offering a cigarette. She shook her head. "I used to heal people," she said quietly. "Now, I don't even know how to stand without shaking." Danny's eyes softened. "Healing takes longer than war, but it comes." A wind moved through the camp, carrying faint notes of an accordion. Hannelore again, turning sorrow into rhythm. Fumiko listened beside her, tapping her fingers to the beat, her dark hair catching the firelight. For a moment, their faces glowed gold, and Lissel realized how strange it was that beauty could survive here at all. She thought of the lilac perfume from months ago, how it had once masked rot. Now, the air smelled of soap, coffee, and the smoke of clean fire, new scents that didn't have to lie. The next morning, an officer came to record their testimonies. His typewriter clattered like distant gunfire. "State your treatment under German authority," he said flatly. Lissel hesitated. The words jammed in her throat. "We worked," she said at last. He frowned. "Worked where?" Hannelore answered for her. "In hell. Does that need an address?" The officer didn't look up. "Please be specific." She laughed, a sharp, defiant sound. "Right, Factory of Ghosts. Maybe someone will read it." When he left, Lissel's hands were shaking. Fumiko reached over and placed a folded haiku paper in her palm. On it were 3 lines written in neat, small strokes. "Freedom is wind's breath, / touching scars that still remember / where chains used to lie." Lissel stared at it until the words blurred. "You keep," Fumiko said. "My heart tired. You stronger." Lissel wanted to protest, to say she wasn't, but Fumiko was already packing. The next truck would take the Asian prisoners east. When it arrived, she bowed deeply before climbing aboard. Lissel watched until the road swallowed her. Afterward, the camp felt emptier. Even Hannelore's jokes fell flat, her piano hands restless without keys. Danny noticed Lissel's silence growing heavier each day. One afternoon, he placed a small mirror in her hands. "You can face it now," he said. She looked, half afraid of what she'd see. The woman staring back was thin, scarred, older than her years, but her eyes were clear. For the first time, she didn't flinch. Later that evening, she walked beyond the tents to the field behind the hospital. Real lilacs grew there, pale and trembling in the breeze. Their scent was light, almost shy. She bent to touch one, and her fingers came away dusted with pollen instead of powder. It made her smile, a real one this time, small and certain. When she returned, Danny was waiting with a clipboard. "They're relocating civilians to Munich tomorrow," he said. "I could put you on the list." She hesitated. "And after Munich?" He shrugged. "Wherever peace decides to land." The way he said it made her laugh softly. "Peace doesn't land," she said. "It limps." That night, rain came gentle and cold. The women huddled under blankets, listening to it drum on canvas. Hannelore whispered, "You think we'll forget?" Lissel answered without opening her eyes. "No, but maybe we'll learn how to remember without bleeding." When dawn broke, the road to Munich shimmered with puddles reflecting pale sky. Trucks waited, engines humming, steam rising like ghosts. Lissel climbed aboard, clutching the haiku in one hand and the lilac sprig in the other. Danny stood by the gate, raising a hand in farewell. She waved back, her sleeve fluttering in the wind. As the convoy rolled out, the camp grew smaller in the distance, a cluster of tents dissolving into mist. The women inside the truck were silent, faces turned toward a horizon they could not yet trust. Then, faintly, through the hum of engines, came the echo of music. Hannelore's accordion played one last time. The melody was crooked, hopeful, unfinished. Lissel leaned her head against the wooden slats and let her eyes close. For the first time, she dreamed without fear. In her dream, the war was still there, smoldering in the corners, but it no longer owned the sky. The lilacs swayed freely, and the air smelled of rain instead of lies. When she woke, the horizon was brightening, the sun slipping through clouds like a cautious promise. She whispered to herself, "Maybe this time, the scent will stay." The camera clicked, a clean, metallic sound that sliced through the murmurs of the crowd. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The soldiers, the nurses, the newly liberated women lined up before the lens. Sunlight spilled across their faces, blinding and soft, making even ruin look holy. Someone said, "Hold still. History only needs one smile." And so they did, Lissel Muller among them, her lips trembling into a practiced curve. Behind that fragile expression was something neither film nor paper could capture: the weight of survival, the cost of being seen. The photograph would travel the world within weeks, printed in newspapers and propaganda reels. Allied heroes liberate German women. A triumphant image of salvation. But in the moment it was taken, Lissel felt only the sting of sweat and memory, the smell of smoke still clinging to her hair. Corporal James Crow stood beside her, one hand resting awkwardly at his side, unsure whether to smile or salute. To the camera, they looked like symbols, two halves of a moral victory. In truth, they were strangers bound by an accident of mercy. After the flash faded, Sergeant Daniel Alvarez lowered his cigarette and muttered, "They'll say it's a happy ending." His tone carried no bitterness, just a quiet resignation. Lissel glanced at him, searching his face. "Isn't it?" she asked. Danny exhaled, the smoke curling like ghosts. "It's an ending. Happiness is optional." The field around them was a chaos of rebuilding. Tents collapsing, trucks loading, voices shouting in 3 languages at once. The war was over, but the disorder had its own rhythm. Hannelore Weiss sat nearby on an overturned crate, polishing the keys of a broken accordion she refused to abandon. "Smile for the camera," they said. She muttered, "Now we're art. Maybe they'll hang us in a museum next to the ruins." Lissel managed a thin laugh. "At least we'll be remembered." Hannelore stopped playing and looked up sharply. "Remembered as what?" Lissel didn't answer. The photographer had already packed his equipment, moving on to capture another miracle, another tableau of liberation that would look cleaner on paper than it felt in the flesh. When he left, the women dispersed like shadows after dawn. Lissel found herself walking toward the edge of camp, where the wild grass grew tall and untamed. The morning light was merciless, showing everything: the crumbled watchtowers, the bullet holes, the burnt sign still bearing half a swastika. She stopped beside the graveyard the soldiers had made for the unburied dead. Wooden crosses, uneven and nameless, dotted the field like broken teeth. Someone had placed a single lilac on one mound. The scent was faint but real. She knelt, fingers trembling, and pressed her palm into the soil. Beneath her hand, the earth was damp and cold. She whispered, "You're free now," though she wasn't sure who she meant, them or herself. Danny approached quietly, his boots crunching the gravel. "We're leaving tomorrow," he said. Orders came through. The unit's heading north. She nodded without looking up. "And us?" "Displaced persons camp near Munich. Papers, doctors, maybe a train home." The word home sounded foreign, stripped of meaning. "Home," she repeated. "Is there still such a thing?" Danny hesitated. "If not, maybe you'll build one." She smiled faintly. "You sound like a priest." "Nah," he said. "Priests believe in forgiveness. I just believe in work." Then, softer, "You should keep something from here. Something that reminds you you're still alive." Lissel glanced around. The wind tugged at her hair, at the folds of her borrowed dress. "I already did," she said, pulling a small envelope from her pocket. The photograph the reporter had left behind, an extra print still damp with chemicals. She held it between them. In it, she stood shoulder to shoulder with Crow and Danny, sunlight painting their faces gold. They looked proud, almost radiant. The illusion was perfect. "You see," she said quietly, We look clean, redeemed. Danny studied the image, his jaw tightening. Maybe that's the point, he said. People need something beautiful to believe in, even if it's a lie, especially then. For a long moment, neither spoke. The wind carried the scent of rain and lilac, and far off, thunder murmured over the hills. Lissel folded the photograph and slipped it back into her coat. Maybe lies are what keep the world from breaking, she said. But they don't heal it. That evening, as the sun sank behind the Alps, the camp's generator sputtered and failed. The lights blinked out one by one, leaving the valley bathed in twilight. Somewhere in the darkness, Hannelore began to play her accordion again, a slow, uneven tune that carried across the field like a heartbeat. The soldiers stopped to listen. Even the wind seemed to pause. Lissel sat beside one of the fires, the photograph in her lap. In the flickering light, the smiles looked different, tighter, almost desperate. She traced her fingertip over her own face until the paper smudged. Danny joined her, offering a cup of lukewarm coffee. "You ever think about what comes next?" he asked. She looked toward the flames, their color shifting from gold to red, every minute. And she took a slow sip, the bitterness grounding her. "Next comes remembering," she said, "then forgiving, then forgetting. In that order, if I'm lucky." Crow appeared from the shadows, a camera slung around his neck, the same one the reporter had used. "Guess he left this behind," he said. "Figured you might want to try it." Lissel hesitated, then took it carefully. It was heavier than she expected, still warm from his hands. She lifted it, looked through the lens, and for the first time saw the world framed instead of endless. The burned towers, the soldiers laughing, the graves, all frozen inside a box of glass and metal. "Strange," she whispered. "You can make something look peaceful just by choosing where to stop the frame." Crow smiled. "That's photography, ma'am. Mercy by omission." Later that night, she found herself alone by the graves again, camera dangling from her shoulder. The moon was full, painting everything in silver and silence. She knelt and placed the folded photograph on one of the crosses, weighing it down with a stone. "You don't belong in newspapers," she said. "You belong here with the truth." Then she took a picture of the grave, the lilac, and the sky above it. The shutter clicked softly, a heartbeat captured in air. When she lowered the camera, tears blurred her vision. For the first time, she didn't wipe them away. They fell freely, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Somewhere behind her, the camp dogs barked, startled by the echo of far-off thunder. She turned, half expecting to see the horizon burning again, but it was only lightning, silent, distant, almost gentle. She whispered into the wind, "We're all photographs that lie." The breeze carried her words away, scattering them across the field like ashes. She closed her eyes and saw again that flash of light, that forced smile, the moment history decided to call her free. When she opened them, the dawn was breaking, soft, gray, and real. The sky smelled of rain and soil, not perfume. She breathed deeply, filling her lungs until it hurt, and whispered, "Let it wash clean." Behind her, the fires burned low, the camp slowly waking. The soldiers were packing trucks, the sound of engines rising with the morning birds. Danny waved from a distance, his silhouette framed by smoke and sunlight. She raised the camera and took one last picture, not for newspapers, not for history, but for herself. In the viewfinder, he looked ordinary, human, unposed. Perfect. As the shutter clicked, the wind lifted again, carrying the scent of lilacs through the air, real this time, growing wild among the ruins. The petals drifted around her like fragments of another world. Lissel smiled, a true smile, small and steady. The war was over, but something inside her was still burning, not with fear but with life. She turned toward the rising sun, the photograph still warm in her pocket, and began to walk. Behind her, the graves, the flags, the lies, all faded into distance. Ahead, the world waited, imperfect, scarred but alive. And as thunder rolled once more across the valley, she didn't flinch. This time, it didn't sound like fear. It sounded like a heartbeat finally finding its rhythm.